The stun baton was already falling when I realized my cheapest guard had stepped between us. I had bought him because no one else would take the contract. That was the truth of it. No romance. No instinct. No grand reading of character. Just arithmetic, humiliation, and a rapidly collapsing future. The labor exchange on Dock Ring 7 smelled like hot coolant and wet metal. Neon price strips crawled across the holding pens, flashing species, specialties, liabilities. Mercenaries stood under hard white lights in clean armor with polished records and impossible rates. Security drones glided overhead, scanning for contraband, unpaid debts, and panic. I had all three. By then, House Tolerance crest meant almost nothing. People still recognized it. That was the worst part. Their eyes would flick to the silver sigil at my collar, then away just fast enough to be insulting. A fallen trade house was entertainment on this station. A young noblewoman trying to hire protection with her last legal credit was better than entertainment. It was sport. I remember tightening my grip around the data slate until the edge bit into my palm. The screen kept recalculating the route risk in a quiet red pulse. Freight corridor to customs bypass. Customs bypass to private transfer spindle. Transfer spindle to the lower shuttle stacks. 3 dead zones. 2 known extortion crews. 1 cargo ledger in my possession worth enough to get me boarded, stripped, and sold back to my enemies as a lesson. I did not need a hero. I needed someone large enough to stand in a doorway and cheap enough that I could still afford fuel. That was how I found the human. He sat apart from the others, not under the bright sales lights, but near a dead vending unit that hummed like it was dreaming. No armor worth naming. No visible augment halo. Gray jacket, worn at the cuffs. Work boots. Human skin gone bronze from some sun I had never seen. A scar disappeared under the line of his jaw. He looked older than the other hires, though human age was always hard to place. His listing was shorter than anyone else's. Jonas Reed. Species, human. Former service, retired. Certifications, close protection, route assessment, cargo recovery. Restrictions, none. Claims filed, none. Rate, 18 credits/day. 18. I checked the display twice because I thought a digit had failed. A Carthian shocklancer nearby laughed when he saw where I was looking. That one's cheap for a reason. Is he unstable? I asked. Worse, the Carthian said. Old. A few of the waiting guards smirked without bothering to hide it. I should have walked away. Cheap hires came with addictions, warrants, missing reflexes, or habits of running at the first gunshot. But I was down to 1 sealed account chip and a family debt marker that followed me through every licensed terminal in civilized space. So I crossed the deck toward him. He did not stand when I stopped in front of him. He looked up slowly, as if he had already heard my footsteps and decided they were not a threat worth rushing for. His eyes were pale, not cold, just very awake. You're available? I asked. For the right job. His voice was rough, low, and almost amused. That irritated me instantly. Men amused by me generally expected either gratitude or surrender. Short-term escort, I said. Station side. Immediate departure. Hazard bonus if we leave in one piece. That usually means you know exactly who wants you dead. I know who wants my cargo. He glanced at the slate in my hand, then at the crest on my collar. His gaze stayed there half a second too long. Cargo gets people killed, he said. So does being recognized. That got the smallest shift from him. Not pity. Not surprise. Recognition, maybe. Something measured. He rose then, and I had been wrong about his size. Sitting had hidden it. He was not enormous, but he had the compact balance of someone built around function, not display. No wasted movement. No wasted attention. Metal stairs rang under their weight as they climbed out of the hiring pit and into station light. The market level above was all glare and noise. White panels buzzed overhead. Vent fans pushed warm air that smelled like machine oil, sweet algae broth, and too many bodies packed into too little space. Traders shouted in 6 languages. Loader drones clicked along painted guide rails. Somewhere close, a child laughed, then stopped too quickly. Vera Keth did not slow down. The contract band around her wrist still held the fresh seal from the labor kiosk. Cheap polymer. Temporary authority. It felt thinner than it should have, considering what she had just bought with the last of her liquid credit. Behind her, Jonas Vale moved in silence. Not close enough to crowd her. Not far enough to look detached. The distance was deliberate. Professional. A bodyguard spacing. It irritated her more than if he had tried to impress her. People noticed. Not the way they noticed wealth. Not the way they noticed danger. This was worse. Small looks. Private ones. A dock broker with scar tissue over one eye glanced at the human, stiffened, and turned away so fast he nearly walked into a cargo post. A pair of retired station militia seated outside a ration stall went silent in mid-argument. One of them half rose before thinking better of it. Vera caught all of it in reflections: polished vendor glass, security screens, the chrome skin of a cleaner unit. Every flick of attention landed on Jonas Vale and slid away again like fingers from a live wire. So he had been recognized. That made him useful. It also made him dangerous in ways she could not yet price. Her berth lay 3 levels down and 2 sectors over, tucked into a freight spine where small independent captains rented docking sleeves too narrow for prestige and too expensive for failure. She owned 1 ship. Barely. The registration still carried her family line, but only because creditors had not yet decided stripping the name off would increase resale value. At the tram gate, a station inspector stepped into her path. Gray uniform, clean boots, data slate tucked under one arm. Young enough to still believe procedure meant safety. "Captain Vera Keth," he said, eyes dropping to the old crest on her collar, then to the labor seal. "Routine verification. Your route filing was amended less than 1 hour ago. That requires review." "Not random, then." Vera kept her voice level. "Review it." The inspector lifted the slate. "Manifest discrepancy. You declared machine parts, medical polymer, and refined ice. But your departure corridor was changed from commercial green to freight amber under a hazard notice." "I did not file that change." "No," he said. "Someone did it under your authorization chain." A quiet pressure gathered in her chest. Not fear. Calculation moving too fast. Amber routes got scanned harder. Delayed longer. Taxed more aggressively. If she missed her launch window, the buyer on Carth Vale would void the medicine contract. That cargo was all that stood between her and the repo notice waiting in her encrypted queue. A different kind of ruin than a street ambush. Cleaner. Legal. The inspector looked past her shoulder. "And your contracted guard lacks certified station registration for armed transit." Jonas stood with empty hands visible. Calm. Bored almost. "He isn't armed," Vera said. "Then his file is worse than missing," the inspector replied. "It's erased." That made her turn. Jonas did not react, but something in his stillness changed. A hardening so slight, it would have been invisible if she had not been looking for weakness and found structure instead. Erased files did not happen to drifters by accident. The inspector straightened. "I'll need access to your cargo hold and temporary detention of your employee pending identity review." There it was. Not a fine. Not a warning. They wanted separation. Vera could lose money later and maybe recover. Lose the cargo, and she lost the ship. Lose the ship, and she lost her future. Cold station light turned every edge hard. The inspector's crest flicked once, silver green under the cargo bay lamps, while 2 security drones shifted into a wider angle around the crate lift. I could hear their rotors more than see them. A thin, hungry whine. The kind of sound built to make civilians nervous before force was used. My hand stayed flat on the freight ledger. If I looked afraid, they would smell weakness and call it procedure. "Temporary detention," the inspector repeated. "Your employee remains on station authority property until identity review clears." Behind me, a pallet jack clicked as cooling metal settled. Somewhere farther down the loading lane, somebody laughed too loudly at a joke they did not mean. Trade went on. It always did. A life could come apart 10 feet away from a shipping office, and nobody would stop counting inventory. Jonas Vale stood half a step behind my right shoulder, where a good bodyguard should have stood if he wanted to look unremarkable. His duffel hung from one hand. His face gave me nothing. I made myself breathe once through my nose. "You already scanned him. We found inconsistencies. You found missing files." "That is an inconsistency." It was a bad answer, and he knew it. The inspector wanted me angry. Angry merchants made mistakes. Angry captains signed station forms without reading the seizure clauses hidden in the bottom third. I shifted the ledger toward me and let my knuckles brush the stun baton clipped under the counter lip. Useless against drones. Worse than useless against a legal hold. The real danger was not violence. It was delay. Delay rotted contracts. Delay let buyers walk. Delay turned fuel payments into debt. Then Jonas moved. Not toward the inspector. Toward the side wall. Only 3 inches. It looked like nothing. A lazy adjustment to get comfortable. But his gaze lifted past the inspector's shoulder and settled on the mirrored panel at the far end of the lane. Not the official lane cam. The polished maintenance cover beside it. Reflection. My pulse skipped. I saw it a second later in that dull steel ghost image. For shapes coming fast through the cross corridor, low and wrong for dock workers. Faces masked. Station jackets zipped high over armor mesh. One of them carried a cutter short enough to hide under a coat. Another had a jammer baton. The biggest one kept his right arm tucked close. Gun. Not station security. Too quiet. Too coordinated. The inspector was still speaking when Jonas said, very softly, "Down." I did not think. I dropped. The first shot cracked over me and punched into the cargo manifest screen. Glass burst across the counter like sleet. One drone jerked to engage and vanished in a shower of sparks before it finished turning. The ambushers had hit the signal net first. Smart. Fast. Planned. The inspector shouted for backup. Jonas was already gone from my side. I had seen fighters before. Drunks, dock enforcers, hired muscle, desperate smugglers. Fighting usually looked messy up close. Too much motion. Too much noise. Too much panic trying to wear the shape of skill. This did not. This looked like memory. Jonas kicked the pallet jack release as he moved, and a loaded crate train rolled sideways across the lane with a scream of metal wheels. Not at the attackers. Between them. Cutting their sight lines in half. Old-fashioned. Physical. No tech trick. Just terrain changed in one move. The gunman fired again and hit cargo plating. Jonas grabbed the inspector by the collar and threw him flat behind the customs desk hard enough to rattle my teeth just from hearing it. Then he snatched the inspector's shock rod before the other man understood he had lost it. One attacker came around the left side of the drifting crates with the cutter up. Jonas met him at the blind corner. No flourish. No warning. One strike to the wrist. A sharp crack. The cutter spun away. Jonas stepped inside the man's balance, drove the shock rod into the seam under his jaw, then let the body fall without looking down. Metal stairs rang under our boots as we dropped into the underlevels, the sound bouncing through ducts wet with coolant mist. The station above still screamed in fragments, alarms, boots, the clipped bark of security channels bleeding through old speakers. But down here the noise turned hollow, swallowed by rusted service tunnels and abandoned freight spines. I kept one hand on the rail and the other pressed against my side where a crate edge had clipped me on the way down. The pain was sharp enough to stay honest. Jonas Vale moved ahead of me like he had been built for places like this. Not fast. Not panicked. Exact. The shock rod hung loose in his hand. Not as a weapon anymore. More like an instrument he had already measured and filed into whatever internal system he used to survive. He never looked back to see if I could keep up. Somehow that irritated me more than if he had. A flickering trade sign threw red light over a junction ahead. 3 old route markings split off there, customs bypass, fuel transfer, and gray market cargo lanes that should have been sealed years ago. Jonas slowed before the signs fully came into view. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not caution. Recognition. "You know this station," I said, breath still ragged. "I know stations built by people who feared riots," he said. It was an answer designed to end the question. I was too tired to let it. We cut through the cargo lanes. The air smelled of old lubricant, hot wiring, and something bitter from a food vat line that had ruptured long ago and never been cleaned properly. Small vendors still lived down here in the shadows between shuttered bulkheads, repair stalls, salvage cages, a medtech booth with half its lights dead. Faces turned as we passed. Most looked at me first. Noble posture. Expensive coat. Trouble. Then their eyes shifted to Jonas. Everything changed there. An old dockhand with one cybernetic eye went still enough to seem unplugged. A woman sorting ration strips under a heat lamp lowered her hand before she finished counting. At a stall built from ship plating, an aging mercenary with service pins welded into his collar stared at Jonas, then dropped his gaze so quickly it looked like fear. I saw it 3 times before I trusted it. By the 4th, I knew. They knew him. Not all of them. Not clearly, but in the way veterans know an old scar pattern. In the way prey animals know weather before the sky breaks. I caught Jonas by the sleeve before he could turn another corner. "Who are you?" His eyes cut to my hand first, then to my face. "Someone getting you out alive." That isn't an answer. It's the one you're getting. He pulled free, not hard, and kept walking. The insult landed deeper than I expected. Maybe because I had bought him. Maybe because I had assumed ownership gave me context. It didn't. All I had purchased was proximity to a locked door. At the next junction, I made a choice that would have disgusted the version of me from 2 days earlier. I stepped in front of him and pointed to a side market glowing amber through bead curtains and patched hollow signs. We stop. His jaw tightened. No, we need supplies. We need a route off this level. And right now, I need answers more than I need your permission. For the first time since I had met him, something close to anger moved behind his expression. It vanished almost immediately, folded away so cleanly it was worse than if he had shouted. Fine, he said. 30 seconds. The market was built inside an old transfer hub with the ceiling stripped open to reveal support ribs and hanging cable nests. Generators hummed under the floor. Steam drifted from vent grates in slow white sheets. I bought a med patch, a fresh power cell, and a station map shard from a boy who never stopped watching Jonas's hands. Then the stall owner at the map table looked up. A cracked lamp above the map stall buzzed twice, then steadied into a sick yellow glow. The stall owner did not greet me. His eyes moved past my face, down to the sealed freight case at my side, then to Jonas standing half a step behind me with his hands loose and empty. That was when the old male went pale. Not frightened, recognizing. He lowered his voice until it was almost lost under the generator hum. Where did you get that crate? I tightened my grip on the handle. Bought the route. Bought the cargo. What? His gaze did not leave the case. Because 3 crews asked about it this morning. 2 of them were Union colors. 1 came with sector authority badges and no warrant. That only happens when the law wants something it cannot admit it wants. Cold air leaked from the vent at my boots. What is in it? If you knew, you would not be carrying it through a market. I felt Jonas shift behind me. Not closer. Sharper. The stall owner swallowed and slid a chipped data wafer beneath the edge of the map table. Take this and leave. Use the maintenance ladder at the east spine. Do not cross the central decks. They sealed the customs archive an hour ago. Who sealed it? He looked at Jonas then, and something hard passed through his face. Old memory. Older fear. The same kind of men who used to follow him. Silence landed between us like dropped metal. I did not turn around. You know him. Everybody old enough knows somebody like him. The stall owner gave a humorless little laugh. Only difference is, most legends die in official reports. This one learned how to stand still. I snatched the wafer and stepped back from the table. Come on. We moved fast into a service corridor lined with dead conduits and sweating pipes. The market noise faded behind us. Our footsteps rang against old steel. I did not speak until we hit a dark junction where blue maintenance lights blinked every few seconds like a failing pulse. Open it, Jonas said. I looked at him. That is not your decision. It became my decision when sector authority started asking for you without a warrant. His voice stayed level, but I heard the pressure underneath it now. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. I set the freight case on an overturned conduit housing. The seals were still intact. My authorization chip trembled once against the lock before the panel flashed green. The lid rose with a soft hiss. Inside lay no weapons. No narcotics. No restricted biotech. It was worse. Layered in shock foam sat a black archive core the size of a human skull, old military issue, with impact scoring along one side and a faded crest burned into the casing. Around it were 3 crystal rods, a folded ledger sheet made from real fiber paper, and a ring-shaped command key marked with battlefield encryption sigils I did not know. Jonas stopped breathing for half a second. I heard it because everything else had gone so quiet. He reached toward the crest, then stopped before touching it. I know this, he said. The words came out dry. I looked from the core to his face. What is it? He stared at the old insignia. War transfer archives. Field-level command records. This kind of core wasn't used for payroll or freight manifests. It carried black route contracts, emergency procurement, casualty revisions, covert transit orders. His jaw tightened. Things governments bury when peace becomes profitable. The blue light blinked again. In that brief wash of color, he looked older than I had ever seen him. I picked up the paper ledger. The sheet crackled in my fingers. Written across the top was a list of shipment codes, militia designations, and payment chains. Some names had been crossed out by hand. Others had sector seals beside them. One seal matched the signature on my contract release. My stomach turned. This route wasn't random, I said. No, Jonas finally looked at me. You were hired because you were disposable. The paper ledger felt heavier once I understood what it was. Not ink. Not numbers. Proof. The stall's yellow light made every seal look diseased. Militia marks. Shipping registries. Side-channel payment routes. Names crossed out in a hand that did not hesitate. One seal still sat near the center of the page like a bruise. The same release authority that had signed me into this run for less money than a dock welder made in a week. Disposable. The word did not leave my head. It moved around inside it, searching for a place to settle. Around us, the market had started to thin. Metal shutters rolled down one by one with hollow bangs that echoed through the passageways. Steam drifted up from a food cart at the far corner and brought the smell of old oil and spice. Somewhere overhead, a transit cable whined against its housing. I looked up from the ledger and studied Jonas. He was not watching me. He was watching reflections. A chipped mirror shard tied to the stall frame. The dark glass of a dead display screen. The polished side of a fuel canister hanging from a hook. He had gone still in that dangerous way I was beginning to recognize. Not calm. Measured. Who signed me over? I asked. Doesn't matter first, he said. The answer irritated me on instinct. Then I saw why he had said it. 3 figures had entered the lane without looking at any merchandise. Most people in a market moved with hunger, boredom, or impatience. These 3 moved with spacing. Equal gaps. Different sight lines. One paused near a rack of cracked respirator masks and turned his head a fraction too slowly, like he was listening to an unseen feed. Another carried a wrapped parcel under one arm, but the weight sat wrong. Weapon weight, not cargo. The last one wore scavenger gray, yet his boots were almost new. Professional. I folded the ledger and slid it inside my jacket. You know them? I said softly. No, Jonas said. But they know me. The stall owner had already ducked behind a hanging tarp. Good sense, at least. I expected Jonas to grab my arm and force a retreat through the back alleys. That was what a bodyguard did. Move the client. Minimize risk. Save the package. Instead, he reached for a stack of old star charts on the table, lifted one, and asked the stall owner in a normal voice, "How much for this?" The old male blinked from behind the tarp. 2 credits. Jonas set down 3. That was the moment I understood he was buying time, not paper. A thin chirp touched the edge of my hearing. Drone signal. I turned just in time to see 2 service drones detach from the underside of the lane arch. Their housings looked civilian until panels split open and compact rotary barrels unfolded from inside. Another pair dropped behind us, boxing the exit. I moved for cover on reflex. Jonas moved first. The rolled star chart snapped from his hand like a baton and struck the nearest drone's sensor cluster with a crack loud enough to cut through the market noise. The machine spun into a lamp post. Yellow glass burst over us. Before its partner could fire, he kicked the map stall sideways. Metal legs screamed against the floor. The whole table toppled between me and the lane, old maps and rust flakes exploding into the air. The first burst chewed through the wood where my chest had been half a second earlier. Down, Jonas said. I was already down. He did not draw a weapon because he barely had one. Cheap guards were not issued military toys. He had the sidearm I'd seen, 1 spare magazine, a knife, and whatever the universe had left him in his hands. That should not have been enough. One of the hunters pushed through the drifting paper cloud and raised a compact rifle. Jonas fired once from behind the overturned stall. Not center mass. Not dramatic. He hit the weapon itself where the receiver met the grip. Sparks jumped. The sparks were still falling when the market finally understood it was witnessing something worse than a gunfight. Panic changed shape. A moment ago, people had been screaming and shoving for exits. Now there was hesitation in it. Recognition. Old instinct. The kind that moved through a crowd faster than sound. A hunter cursed as his rifle died in his hands, and one of the older dock workers near the spice bins went pale beneath blue-gray skin. He knew that shot. I saw it happen in his face. Jonas used the heartbeat that shock gave him. He grabbed the front of my coat and dragged me deeper behind the overturned stall as splinters kicked off the metal frame above us. The ledger was still under my arm. My hand had locked around it so hard my fingers hurt. Move, he said. Not loud. Never loud. We crawled through a rain of paper slips, broken seal tags, and powdered spice that stung my eyes. The hunters had fanned out. I could hear them now instead of seeing them. Boots on polymer tile, clipped signals over shortband comms, the dry mechanical click of weapons checking chamber status. Professional. Too many. At the back of the stall line, a service hatch hung half-open beside a refrigeration unit humming against the wall. I pointed. Jonas didn't ask if I was sure. He shoved the hatch wider with his shoulder, and we dropped into a maintenance corridor barely 3 feet across. The market noise vanished behind us like a door shutting on weather. Cold pipes sweated over our heads. Emergency strips threw a weak amber light along the floor. It smelled like coolant, dust, and old electricity. Somewhere far off, a turbine beat a slow metallic rhythm through the walls. I bent over, trying to get air into my lungs. They saw us take it, I said. No. Jonas replied, listening at the hatch. They saw you survive long enough to become expensive. That should have sounded bitter. It didn't. It sounded like math. A pulse hit the market public address above us, then static. They were locking sectors down, trapping us inside the commercial ring. Not random enforcers, then. Organized enough to own infrastructure for a few minutes. Rich enough to borrow authority. My stomach turned colder than the corridor. They're not just after the ledger. They're after what it proves. I stared at him. You knew? I suspected. You might have mentioned that before I bought a disposable guard. That made him finally look at me. The amber light cut his face into hard planes and old shadows. There was blood at his sleeve, not much, but enough to darken the fabric. His breathing stayed steady. Mine didn't. I told you not to open certain doors, he said. And I told you I don't enjoy being lied to. A hard metallic bang echoed through the corridor somewhere to our left. Another hatch. They were sweeping inward. Jonas checked his sidearm. One round chambered. Very few left. He looked down the corridor, then up at the maintenance map stenciled on the wall, faded almost to nothing. No route out. For the first time since I had hired him, I watched him reach the end of options. Not panic. Not fear. Recognition. He lowered the gun a fraction. I understood, suddenly, that the silence he wore was not emptiness. It was restraint. It had edges. Wait. Cost. Tell me the truth, I said. Another bang. Closer. His jaw tightened once. This is not the moment. It is exactly the moment. My voice came out sharper than I intended, then steadier. I bought a bodyguard who keeps surviving things he should not survive. Strangers keep staring at him like they've seen a ghost. Men with military discipline are sealing an entire market over a paper book. If we die in this corridor, I am not doing it ignorant. The words hung between us with the hum of the pipes. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, something old came back into them. Not anger. Not pride. Command. Steam rolled low across the corridor, turning the emergency strobes into bands of red fog. For one beat, all I could hear was the station breathing through old pipes and damaged vents. Then Jonas Vale looked at the sealed blast door ahead of us, the stacked cargo menus flickering on the wall, and the fear inside me changed shape. It became work. Tell me what you own, he said. The voice was quiet. That was the worst part. Men who bluffed got louder when they were cornered. Jonas had gone softer, like the station had finally become small enough for him to understand. I own almost nothing, I said. A shipping license. 2 warehouse slots in Dock Ring C. 3 route debts people still pretend they will repay. Half a dozen favors from thieves who hate me less than they hate each other. That will do. Behind us, boots hit metal grating in organized bursts. Not dock thugs this time. Train movement. Spacing. Discipline. The people closing the market had found our corridor. Jonas took the paper book from under his arm and pushed it into my hands. Keep that dry, he said. It is why they stopped pretending. I stared at him. That is not an explanation. No, he said. It's an order. A week earlier, I would have hated him for that. In that corridor, with the pipes hissing and soldiers tightening a noose around half the station, I only hated that it worked. I moved. My wrist pads still had authority over my warehouse slots, my loaders, and the lane traffic linked to my contracts. Not enough to win a war. Enough to make one ugly. I sent a burst call to every captain who owed me, every fence who used my manifests, every loader boss who had ever skimmed from my cargo and lived because I let them. Come to Dock Ring C, bring crew, bring tools, burn your debt, or lose your routes forever. Jonas listened to the outgoing pings and nodded once. Good. Now call the station core and report a coolant instability in the freight spine. I looked up. There isn't one. There will be. He crouched by a maintenance panel, peeled it open with the muzzle of his pistol, and reached into the wiring with the calm of a man adjusting a kitchen appliance. Sparks snapped blue across his knuckles. The corridor lights dimmed. Somewhere below us, a warning chime began to pulse. I swallowed. You know the station. I know how stations are built when governments expect riots, he said. And I know how criminals rebuild them badly afterward. The first breach team hit the far door 30 seconds later. Not shooting. Cutting. The metal turned white around the seam. Jonas pulled me down the side passage toward freight elevators the public never saw. My boots slipped on condensed water. The air smelled of hot steel, machine oil, and the sharp chemical sting of overworked coolant. Behind us, the cut completed with a shriek. Then the station shuddered. Freight spine, C dumped pressure exactly the way Jonas intended. Massive cargo locks defaulted shut across 3 adjoining lanes. Loader cranes froze where they hung. Conveyor belts screamed and stopped. Every smuggler, porter, and dock boss in that section lost money in the same second. My comm board exploded with curses. Then names started answering. Not because they loved me. Because I had just made myself the fastest path back to profit. By the time we reached the industrial core overlook, my people were moving. A loader team from Bay 12 had cut power to one customs arch. 2 independent haulers had parked their rigs sideways across a munitions lane. A gang that usually robbed food pallets was now lifting crate barricades under my instructions because they wanted their route access restored before the night cycle ended. Jonas stood over the rail and watched all of it in silence. This was not the close, brutal survival of the market corridor. This was larger, colder, a board with moving pieces. He began placing them. Open cargo lane 7, then close 8. Funnel them left. Open cargo lane 7, then close 8. Funnel them left. I heard Jonas say it in the same tone a man might use to ask for water. No strain, no triumph, just certainty. Below us, the freight district moved. Not fast, not clean, but it moved. Old loading drones wheezed through vapor. Emergency lights flashed red over steel catwalks slick with coolant mist. Dock crews, smugglers, mechanics, and street gangs who had hated each other an hour ago now dragged crate walls into place because Jonas had turned panic into geometry. He had found lines in the station no one else could see, and the enemy followed every one of them. Their assault teams poured through lane 7 exactly as he intended. They came expecting frightened merchants and broken security. Instead, they hit collapsing choke points, blind corners, and cargo haulers shoved sideways into kill funnels. Not a battlefield of heroics. A trap made of schedules, freight maps, and desperate people who had finally chosen a side. Mine. I keyed the district channel with fingers that still shook from blood loss. Seal lane 8 now. Massive blast shutters screamed as they came down. The sound rolled through the station like judgment. Then the first enemy transport rammed into the locked corridor and jackknifed it. The second slammed into the first. Behind them, more troops piled into a space that had suddenly become a metal grave with only one exit left. The one Jonas had left open. He leaned on the rail beside me, pale under the hard red lights, one hand pressed against the wound under his coat. He had lost too much blood in the lower works. Anyone else would have been on the floor. He was still thinking 3 moves ahead. They'll push to the reactor service bridge next, he said. I looked at him. How do you know? His mouth barely moved. Because that's what I'd do. That landed colder than the alarms. Not because it was clever. Because of the weight behind it. Below, station security finally arrived in organized numbers, moving where he had already predicted they would be needed. Civilian crews cut power to the right sectors. Dock clamps released empty barges into auxiliary lanes, blocking retreat. The attackers were not being beaten by brute force. They were being erased by logistics, by memory, by a man the galaxy had thrown away and then failed to kill. A voice crackled over local comms. Station command this time. Formal. Tight. Unknown human advisor on deck control. Identify yourself immediately. Jonas said nothing. He did not even look at the speaker grill. I realized then what the silence meant. He had hidden for years not because he was ashamed of what he had been. He had hidden because the name itself still had power. Enough to change how every person in this station would move. Enough to draw predators from systems away. Enough to make survival smaller than legend. The bridge lights flickered. Then the enemy did exactly what Jonas had predicted. Their surviving commander abandoned the trapped corridors and drove the remaining force toward the reactor service bridge, trying to seize the station core before the district lockdown became total. A direct route. A desperate route. A route with civilians still inside maintenance shelters. I turned to issue the warning, but Jonas caught my wrist. His grip was weak. His eyes were not. "No," he said. "You do it." I stared at him. He had carried every impossible decision so far. Every calculation. Every brutal necessity. And now, when the whole station was listening, he pushed the next move back to me. Agency. Trust. Choice. Not his war alone. Mine. I opened command broadcast across freight, service, and station security. "This is Veraketh. Evacuate the reactor shelters through coolant bypass 2 and 3. Collapse bridge access behind the last civilian team. Security units, hold distance and follow my timing, not your fear. We are not stopping them at the bridge. We are letting them reach the span." A beat of silence answered me. Then voices came back, one by one. "Copy. Bypass 2 moving.